The bravest soul in a kingdom is often the one everyone mistakes for the weakest. The joyful sound of music echoed across the royal capital as thousands of visitors gathered beneath colorful banners celebrating the annual Spring Moon Festival, the most anticipated day of the year throughout every pack in the kingdom. Merchants filled the wide stone streets with handcrafted goods. Children laughed while chasing ribbons dancing in the warm afternoon breeze, and elegant nobles stood shoulder to shoulder with ordinary families, all waiting for the arrival of the Alpha King. Along the grand avenue leading toward the palace courtyard, royal guards watched every rooftop and every crowded corner with disciplined attention, determined that nothing would disturb the celebration. Standing quietly near the edge of the gathering was a young white-skinned Omega named Emily Brooks, 23 years old, wearing a simple pale gray dress beneath a weathered wool cloak that looked far too plain among the luxurious clothing surrounding her. She kept her eyes lowered, hoping to remain unnoticed, accustomed to blending into the background after years of hearing whispers that she was too frail to matter. She had almost decided to leave before the royal procession arrived, when something unusual caught her attention. A man standing several yards away appeared calm, almost invisible within the cheering crowd, yet his eyes never followed the musicians, the dancers, or the approaching royal carriage. Instead, they remained completely fixed upon the path where the Alpha King would soon appear. Emily felt an unexpected chill despite the warmth of the spring afternoon. She looked away for only a moment before noticing another small detail that everyone else ignored. While the surrounding spectators clapped and smiled, the stranger's breathing never changed. His shoulders remained unnaturally still, and one hand stayed hidden beneath the folds of his dark traveling cloak. Emily could not explain why those tiny details unsettled her, but every instinct inside her quietly warned that something was terribly wrong. The distant sound of ceremonial horns suddenly rolled across the city, announcing the arrival of the royal procession. The crowd erupted with excitement as the magnificent white carriage entered the avenue, surrounded by mounted royal guards wearing polished silver armor. Moments later, the Alpha King stepped into view, greeting the cheering citizens with calm dignity and a warm smile that reflected years of wise leadership. The stranger never smiled. His hidden hand moved ever so slightly beneath his cloak. Time seemed to slow as Emily's heartbeat echoed louder than the celebration surrounding her. She did not stop to think. She did not wonder whether anyone would believe her. She simply ran. Gasps swept through the crowd as the quiet Omega pushed through startled spectators, ignoring confused voices calling after her. Royal guards instinctively moved toward her, believing she had broken the protective line surrounding the Alpha King, but Emily never looked at them. Her eyes remained fixed upon the silent stranger whose posture had changed almost imperceptibly. With every step, she felt the weight of fear pressing against her chest. Yet another feeling proved stronger. She could not stand still while danger approached another person, even if that person happened to be the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Just as she reached the royal pathway, the Alpha King turned toward the unexpected commotion, his calm gray eyes meeting hers for the briefest instant. Neither of them understood why destiny had chosen that exact moment to bring their lives together. But within seconds, one decision made by the kingdom's most overlooked Omega would change both of their futures forever. 2 weeks earlier, far from the magnificent streets of the royal capital, Emily Brooks lived alone in a modest wooden cottage resting at the edge of Moonridge Pack, where the forest met rolling green hills and quiet streams. Every morning before sunrise, she gathered fresh herbs, collected clean spring water, and prepared simple remedies for anyone who needed help, even though very few people ever thanked her. Most members of the pack believed she was too fragile to contribute anything meaningful because she lacked the physical strength many admired. They often chose stronger Omegas whenever important duties were assigned, leaving Emily with the smallest and least noticeable tasks. She accepted every disappointment with quiet grace, never allowing bitterness to take root inside her heart. Instead, she greeted every neighbor with a warm smile whether they returned the kindness or not. Children occasionally visited her little garden after school because they knew she always shared fresh bread or sweet berries gathered from the forest. Elderly villagers appreciated the healing herbs she quietly left outside their doors during difficult seasons, although many never discovered who had provided them. Emily never expected recognition. She believed kindness held value even when no one noticed it. One rainy afternoon, while returning from the forest carrying a basket filled with medicinal plants, she heard the frightened whinny of a horse somewhere beyond the trees. Following the sound through the falling rain, she discovered a magnificent black stallion standing nervously beside a narrow trail. A man wearing a dark traveling cloak leaned against a large oak tree, breathing heavily after apparently slipping along the muddy hillside. His clothing appeared expensive despite being partially covered with rain and dust, yet he carried himself with surprising calm instead of frustration. Emily immediately set down her basket and approached with gentle caution, asking whether he had been injured. The stranger smiled politely and assured her it was nothing serious, but when he tried taking another step, he briefly lost his balance. Without hesitation, Emily offered her shoulder to support him and guided both the traveler and his horse toward her nearby cottage. Inside the small home, she carefully cleaned the minor scrapes on his hands, prepared warm herbal tea, and served homemade vegetable soup while rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Throughout the evening, they exchanged only simple conversation. The traveler never revealed his name or occupation, and Emily never asked. She believed every person deserved the freedom to keep certain parts of their life private. Instead, they spoke about the beauty of the surrounding mountains, the peaceful songs of birds at sunrise, and the comfort found in helping strangers without expecting anything in return. The mysterious traveler listened more than he spoke, quietly observing the warmth filling the humble cottage despite its simple furnishings. Before dawn the following morning, the rain had ended. The stranger thanked Emily sincerely for her kindness, leaving a small silver coin upon the table as payment. Emily gently returned it to him with a smile, explaining that compassion should never become a business transaction. The traveler looked at her with quiet admiration before accepting the coin back into his pocket. As he rode away beneath the first golden light of morning, Emily believed she would never see him again. She returned to tending her herb garden, completely unaware that the humble stranger she had helped without hesitation carried a secret that would soon intertwine her ordinary life with the destiny of an entire kingdom. The mysterious traveler continued his journey through the northern mountains long before the morning mist lifted from Moonridge Pack, but Emily Brooks quickly returned to the simple rhythm of her ordinary life as though nothing unusual had happened. She spent her days gathering fresh herbs beneath towering oak trees, delivering healing remedies to elderly neighbors, and quietly repairing the small wooden fences surrounding her modest cottage. Although many members of the pack still overlooked her, she never allowed disappointment to shape the way she treated others. She greeted every passerby with the same gentle smile, even those who rarely returned the kindness. Yet without realizing it, the stranger she had helped carried the memory of her compassion far more deeply than she could imagine. Several days after leaving Moonridge, the traveler arrived at the royal citadel, where thousands of royal guards immediately bowed in respect as he rode through the towering palace gates. The quiet man Emily had welcomed into her cottage was not an ordinary traveler at all. He was Alpha King Alexander Reed, ruler of every allied pack throughout the kingdom. During a private council meeting, his advisors carefully reviewed reports concerning border disputes, trade agreements, and preparations for the upcoming Spring Moon Festival. As the discussions continued, Alexander found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back toward the small forest cottage where an unknown Omega had offered warmth without asking his name, his title, or anything in return. For the first time in many years, someone had treated him simply as another weary traveler rather than the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. The memory stayed with him long after the meeting had ended. Meanwhile, life in Moonridge Pack remained unchanged for Emily. One afternoon, she delivered fresh herbal medicine to an elderly widow living near the edge of the village. As Emily quietly walked home carrying her empty basket, she overheard several villagers discussing the announcement that invitations had been delivered for the grand Spring Moon Festival in the royal capital. Every pack had been asked to send representatives to celebrate another year of peace beneath the Alpha King's leadership. Emily smiled politely while continuing along the dusty path, fully expecting that someone else would be selected. To her surprise, the following morning the Moonridge Pack messenger stopped outside her cottage carrying an official invitation sealed with the royal crest. Even the messenger appeared confused as he handed the elegant parchment to the quiet Omega. Emily carefully opened the letter and read that every pack was encouraged to include individuals whose service reflected compassion and integrity within their communities. She looked around her tiny cottage in complete disbelief, wondering whether some mistake had been made. Across the village, whispers quickly spread as neighbors questioned why someone as ordinary as Emily had received such an honor. Some dismissed it as luck, while others suggested the invitation had been sent by accident. Emily paid little attention to the speculation. She carefully folded the letter, placed it inside her favorite book for safekeeping, and quietly began preparing for the journey. She owned no expensive gowns or jewelry, only a simple pale gray dress and the weathered wool cloak that had protected her through countless seasons. As she stood beneath the evening sky watching the first stars appear above the mountains, she felt both excitement and uncertainty. She believed she was traveling only to witness a beautiful celebration, never imagining that the stranger she had once sheltered from the rain was already waiting in the capital, remembering every act of kindness she believed had long been forgotten. The road leading to the royal capital came alive beneath clear spring skies as travelers from every allied pack filled the wide stone highways with decorated wagons, horseback riders, musicians, and families eager to celebrate the annual Spring Moon Festival. Emily Brooks arrived shortly before noon, quietly stepping through the towering city gates with nothing more than her small travel bag and the weathered gray cloak she had worn for years. She paused for a moment to admire the magnificent streets lined with flowering trees, colorful banners, and elegant stone buildings unlike anything she had ever seen in Moonridge Pack. Everywhere she looked, laughter echoed through the bustling marketplace while merchants displayed handcrafted jewelry, woven blankets, fragrant pastries, and polished wooden carvings. Although surrounded by beauty, Emily could not ignore the feeling that she did not truly belong among the finely dressed nobles and respected pack leaders gathering throughout the city. She quietly found a place near the edge of the Grand Avenue where ordinary visitors had been invited to watch the royal procession later that afternoon. Meanwhile, inside the royal citadel, Alpha King Alexander Reed met privately with his trusted captain of the royal guard to review the final security arrangements before the ceremony. Every entrance, balcony, rooftop, and courtyard had been carefully inspected, and dozens of experienced guards had already taken their assigned positions throughout the capital. Even so, Alexander sensed an unusual tension among his advisors. During the previous week, several anonymous warnings had arrived suggesting that someone intended to disrupt the festival. None of the reports contained enough evidence to identify a specific threat, yet the captain quietly recommended shortening the public procession. Alexander listened thoughtfully before calmly declining the suggestion. He believed the people deserved to celebrate together after another peaceful year, and he refused to allow fear to overshadow hope. As preparations continued inside the palace, a lone traveler wearing an ordinary dark cloak entered the capital through a different gate without attracting attention. He blended naturally among merchants and visitors, carrying himself with patient confidence while carefully observing the city's rhythm. His face revealed no emotion as he slowly moved closer to the avenue where the Alpha King would soon greet the public. Several times he paused to study the movements of the royal guards before continuing through the growing crowd. Far away, Emily wandered through a nearby market after purchasing a simple loaf of fresh bread. While waiting beside a fountain, she noticed the same dark-cloaked traveler passing quietly between groups of visitors. There was nothing unusual about his appearance, yet something about the way he observed his surroundings unsettled her. Unlike everyone else preparing for the celebration, he never smiled at the music, never paused to admire the decorations, and never spoke with another traveler. His attention remained fixed upon the route leading toward the palace. Emily tried to dismiss the feeling as simple imagination, reminding herself that she had no reason to judge a stranger. Even so, she found herself watching him a little longer before he disappeared into the crowd. As afternoon sunlight spread across the city, ceremonial horns echoed from the palace towers, signaling that the royal procession would begin within minutes. Citizens eagerly gathered along the avenue while royal guards quietly tightened their protective formation. Emily took a slow breath and joined the waiting crowd, unaware that the uneasy feeling lingering inside her heart would soon place her directly between the kingdom's most powerful ruler and a single choice that would change countless lives forever. The royal procession advanced slowly through the heart of the capital as waves of applause rolled across the crowded avenue. Alpha King Alexander Reed acknowledged every family, every elder, and every child with calm dignity, believing that a ruler's greatest strength was found not upon a throne but among the people who placed their trust in him. Sunlight reflected from the silver crests carried by the royal guards while musicians filled the air with triumphant melodies that blended with the joyful voices of thousands gathered for the celebration. Emily Brooks stood quietly several yards from the royal pathway, surrounded by strangers whose excitement seemed untouched by worry. Yet the uneasy feeling inside her had only grown stronger. Her eyes searched the moving crowd until they found the dark-cloaked traveler once again. He had quietly changed positions 3 different times without ever joining the celebration, always keeping a clear view of the Alpha King. Most people would never have noticed such small movements, but Emily remembered how still he had remained earlier that afternoon, how carefully he had observed every guard instead of the festival itself. As the royal carriage drew closer, another subtle detail caught her attention. The man's hidden arm shifted beneath his cloak while his gaze remained perfectly steady, not with admiration but with unwavering concentration. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Nothing visible confirmed that danger truly existed, yet every instinct urged her to act before it was too late. Around her, spectators leaned forward hoping for a better glimpse of the Alpha King, making it even harder for the royal guards to distinguish ordinary movement from unusual behavior. Emily looked toward the nearest guard, considering whether she should speak, but the celebration was so loud that her voice would likely disappear beneath the cheers before anyone understood her warning. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then the stranger took one deliberate step forward. It was not a hurried movement, nor an obvious one, but something about the quiet certainty in his posture convinced Emily that waiting even another second would be a mistake. She tightened her hands, drew a deep breath, and began pushing through the crowd as startled spectators turned in confusion. Several people reached out instinctively, believing she had simply lost her footing, but Emily continued moving toward the royal pathway with unwavering determination. Royal guards immediately reacted, stepping into her path as they prepared to intercept the unexpected visitor. At that exact moment, Alpha King Alexander Reed turned his head toward the growing commotion. His eyes met Emily's for the second time in their lives, and although he did not immediately recognize the young woman standing before him, there was something remarkably familiar about the quiet courage shining across her face. She never looked away from the dark-cloaked stranger. Her attention remained fixed beyond the king, focused entirely upon the figure whose careful movements no longer matched those of a curious spectator. Without thinking about her own reputation, without wondering whether anyone would believe her, Emily placed herself directly between the approaching ruler and the unknown traveler. The joyful music continued playing around them, yet for Emily every cheerful sound faded into silence. All she could hear was the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat and the quiet conviction that sometimes the smallest voice inside the heart deserves to be trusted before the loudest evidence ever appears. The moment Emily Brooks stepped into the royal pathway, confusion swept across the avenue. Several royal guards instinctively moved toward her, believing she had crossed the security line by mistake. But before anyone could reach her, the dark-cloaked stranger abruptly changed direction. Instead of blending back into the crowd, he turned away and disappeared into the sea of festival visitors with surprising speed, abandoning whatever purpose had drawn him so close to the Alpha King. The captain of the royal guard immediately ordered several officers to quietly follow the fleeing figure, while the remaining guards formed a protective circle around the king. The music gradually faded as curious whispers replaced cheerful laughter throughout the avenue. Emily remained standing exactly where she had stopped, breathing quickly, uncertain whether she had prevented real danger or simply embarrassed herself before the entire kingdom. For several long moments, complete silence surrounded the royal procession. Alpha King Alexander Reed slowly stepped forward until only a few feet separated him from the young Omega. He studied her face with calm attention, searching through a memory that suddenly felt remarkably familiar. Emily lowered her eyes respectfully, expecting criticism for disrupting the ceremony. Instead, Alexander spoke with quiet kindness. He asked her why she had rushed toward him despite the obvious risk of being stopped by the guards. Emily hesitated before answering honestly that she had noticed someone whose behavior did not match the joyful spirit of the festival. She explained that nothing she had seen proved wrongdoing, yet every instinct inside her had urged her to act before regret became impossible to undo. Her voice remained gentle and steady, without exaggeration or dramatic claims. She simply described what she had observed and admitted that she would rather endure public embarrassment than ignore a warning she could not explain. The captain returned several minutes later with a thoughtful expression. The suspicious traveler had vanished into the crowded streets before the guards could question him, leaving behind only uncertainty. Although no immediate threat had been discovered, the captain quietly admitted that Emily's observations matched several details the royal security team had already been monitoring throughout the morning. Alexander remained silent as those words settled over the gathering. Then his attention returned to the young woman standing before him. A sudden memory surfaced with perfect clarity. He remembered a rainy afternoon, a lonely forest cottage, warm herbal tea, fresh vegetable soup, and a quiet Omega who had offered help without asking for recognition. He remembered placing a silver coin upon a wooden table, only to watch her gently return it because kindness, she had said, should never become a business transaction. His expression softened with unmistakable recognition. Emily slowly lifted her eyes, finally noticing something familiar within the Alpha King's calm gray gaze. The memory struck her just as unexpectedly. The weary traveler she had welcomed into her home, and the ruler standing before the entire kingdom were the very same man. Before she could find the words to apologize for not recognizing him sooner, Alexander smiled warmly and thanked her twice in a single sentence, once for opening her home to a stranger during a storm, and once for trusting her heart enough to step forward when everyone else remained still. The thousands gathered along the avenue watched in complete astonishment as the Alpha King spoke to the overlooked Omega with genuine gratitude, while Emily quietly realized that the smallest act of compassion had returned to her in a way she never could have imagined. An uneasy silence settled over the Grand Avenue after the Alpha King revealed that he already knew the quiet Omega standing before him. Thousands of eyes shifted between Emily Brooks and Alexander Reed, struggling to understand how an overlooked young woman from a distant pack could possibly have earned the gratitude of the kingdom's ruler. The nobles standing closest to the royal carriage exchanged puzzled glances, while representatives from the allied packs whispered among themselves, each trying to uncover the mystery before someone else did. Alexander slowly raised one hand, and the growing murmur faded until only the gentle breeze could be heard moving through the festival banners overhead. His calm voice carried across the crowded avenue with effortless authority as he addressed every citizen gathered before him. He explained that several weeks earlier, while traveling through the northern territories without revealing his identity, unexpected rain had forced him to seek shelter. He told them that one humble cottage had welcomed a complete stranger without hesitation. Its owner had offered warm food, clean bandages, and sincere kindness while asking nothing about his name, his position, or his wealth. She had even refused payment because, in her own words, compassion should never become a business transaction. As those words echoed through the capital, many people lowered their eyes in quiet reflection. Alexander then looked directly toward Emily, his expression filled with genuine respect rather than royal formality. He admitted that during all his years as Alpha King, countless people had shown him loyalty because of the crown he wore, yet very few had shown kindness without first knowing who he was. Emily had done exactly that. Today, she had once again trusted her heart instead of protecting her own comfort, stepping forward simply because she believed another human life might be in danger. Whether or not anyone else understood her decision in that moment, she had acted with courage guided entirely by compassion. The captain of the Royal Guard stepped forward and confirmed that Emily's observations matched several concerns already being monitored by the security team, validating that her instincts had been both responsible and remarkably perceptive. The atmosphere throughout the festival changed almost instantly. The same visitors who had barely noticed the quiet Omega only moments earlier now looked at her with admiration instead of indifference. Even several nobles who had quietly questioned why someone dressed so simply had received a royal invitation now stood in thoughtful silence. Emily felt hundreds of eyes upon her and wished she could quietly disappear into the crowd once again. Recognition had never been her goal. She gently explained that she had only done what she believed anyone should do when another person might need help. Alexander smiled softly at her answer because it confirmed everything he already believed about her character. He turned back toward the assembled citizens and reminded them that true strength could never be measured by physical power, expensive clothing, or noble titles alone. The strongest hearts were often hidden behind the quietest voices, and kingdoms remained peaceful because ordinary people chose kindness long before history ever remembered their names. As warm applause gradually spread across the avenue, Emily realized that for the first time in her life, people were not looking at her because of what they believed she lacked. They were finally seeing the quiet courage she had carried within her all along, and the respect reflected in their eyes marked the beginning of a future neither she nor the Alpha King had ever expected. The Spring Moon Festival resumed with a spirit unlike anything the kingdom had witnessed in generations. The joyful music returned, but its meaning felt different now because every note carried the memory of a quiet act of courage that had reminded the people what true honor really looked like. Alpha King Alexander Reed invited Emily Brooks to walk beside him toward the palace courtyard, not as a guest standing behind the crowd, but as someone whose character deserved to be seen by the entire kingdom. Emily hesitated for a brief moment, uncomfortable with so much attention, yet Alexander offered an encouraging smile that reminded her she did not need to become someone different to deserve respect. As they crossed the polished stone courtyard together, representatives from every allied pack rose to their feet in silent acknowledgement. Among them stood the delegation from Moonridge Pack. Several members who had once dismissed Emily as too fragile to matter could barely meet her eyes. They remembered every careless remark, every opportunity they had denied her, and every moment they had mistaken quietness for weakness. The leader of Moonridge Pack slowly stepped forward and bowed his head with sincere humility. In front of nobles, warriors, merchants, and ordinary citizens alike, he admitted that his own judgment had been clouded by appearances. He apologized for overlooking the gifts that could not be measured by physical strength alone and thanked Emily for bringing honor to the pack through her compassion rather than through pride. Emily accepted the apology with the same gentle grace that had always defined her. She did not remind anyone of their past mistakes, nor did she seek satisfaction from their embarrassment. Instead, she simply expressed her hope that every young Omega growing up within Moonridge would one day be valued for the goodness of their heart as much as for any outward ability. Her words settled over the courtyard with quiet power, touching far more people than a lengthy speech ever could. Alpha King Alexander Reed then turned toward the royal council and announced that the kingdom needed more people who possessed wisdom, empathy, and unwavering integrity. He declared that Emily Brooks would receive the newly established title of Royal Guardian of Compassion, an honor created not to celebrate physical strength, but to recognize those whose courage protected others through selfless character and sound judgment. A beautifully crafted silver medallion bearing the royal crest was placed around Emily's neck as the crowd erupted into warm applause. The honor carried no burden of warfare or conflict. Instead, it entrusted her with helping guide charitable efforts, supporting families across the allied packs, and advising the crown on matters affecting the most vulnerable members of the kingdom. Emily accepted the responsibility with quiet humility, promising only that she would continue living by the same principles that had guided her long before anyone knew her name. As the afternoon sunlight bathed the palace courtyard in golden light, Alexander realized that the greatest victory celebrated that day was not the success of a festival or the protection of a king. It was the restoration of justice for someone who had quietly deserved it all along, proving to everyone gathered that genuine greatness begins with compassion, grows through courage, and shines brightest in those who never seek recognition for themselves. 1 year later, the Spring Moon Festival once again filled the royal capital with music, laughter, and the hopeful voices of families arriving from every allied pack. Yet this celebration carried a deeper meaning than the one before it. Throughout the kingdom, Stories had quietly spread about the gentle Omega who had changed the course of a single afternoon simply because she chose compassion over hesitation. Emily Brooks had never sought fame, and despite the honor placed upon her shoulders, very little about her daily life had changed. She still visited remote villages where elderly couples needed medicine, still listened patiently to frightened children, and still preferred walking forest trails to attending grand banquets whenever her duties allowed. The silver medallion of the Royal Guardian of Compassion rested beneath her simple cloak more often than it rested on display, because she believed that service should always matter more than recognition. Her example slowly inspired change throughout the kingdom. Young Omegas who had once doubted their own worth began volunteering beside healers, teachers, and community leaders. Pack elders started evaluating character alongside strength when choosing future representatives. Even the Royal Guard introduced new training that encouraged observation, patience, and sound judgment, recognizing that courage often began with careful attention rather than physical power alone. Alpha King Alexander Reed watched these quiet transformations with deep gratitude. He understood that lasting change rarely arrived through dramatic speeches or royal decrees. Instead, it grew from ordinary people choosing kindness again and again until an entire culture slowly followed their example. During the closing ceremony of the festival, Alexander invited Emily to stand beside him before the gathered citizens. Looking across the sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces, he spoke not about his own accomplishments, but about the lesson the kingdom had learned together. He reminded everyone that a crown could guide a nation, but only compassion could strengthen its heart. He thanked Emily once more for teaching that lesson through her actions rather than through words, and he encouraged every family present to recognize quiet goodness wherever they found it, especially when the world overlooked it. Emily smiled with humble gratitude before offering only a few simple words of her own. She said that every person carried opportunities each day to make another life brighter, sometimes through a generous act, sometimes through patient listening, and sometimes simply by believing in someone who had forgotten how to believe in themselves. She hoped the kingdom would remember that no act of kindness was ever truly small because its greatest impact often appeared long after the moment itself had passed. As the evening sky filled with glowing lanterns drifting above the palace towers, thousands of people looked upward together, each light reflecting a promise carried quietly from one heart to another. Alexander glanced toward Emily and realized that destiny had not chosen the strongest warrior or the wealthiest noble to leave the kingdom's greatest legacy. It had chosen the overlooked Omega whose gentle courage reminded everyone that true strength protects, true honor serves, and true love for others begins with a single compassionate choice. And beneath the peaceful spring sky, where hope now shined brighter than fear, the kingdom stepped confidently into its future, forever changed by one quiet heart that had refused to look away when kindness was needed most.